Industrial Revolution and the Great Depression, America adapted a new economy, a 20th century economy, guiding our free market with regulations to protect health and safety and fair competition.
Empowering workers with union movements, investing in science and infrastructure and educational institutions like U of I, strengthening a system of primary and secondary education, and stitching together a social safety net. And all of this led to unrivaled prosperity and the rise of a broad and deep middle class, in the sense that if you worked hard, you could climb the ladder of success. And not everyone was included in this prosperity. There's a lot more work to do. And so, in response to the state of slavery and segregation and the reality of racial discrimination, the civil rights movement not only opened new doors for African Americans, but also opened up the floodgates of opportunity for women and Americans with disabilities and LGBT Americans, others to make their own claims to full and equal citizenship. And although discrimination remained a pernicious force in our society and continues to this day, and although there are controversies about how to best ensure genuine equality of opportunity, there's been at least rough agreement among the overwhelming majority of Americans that our country is strongest when everybody's treated fairly. When people are judged on the merits and the content of their character, not the color of their skin, or the way in which they worship God, or their last names.
Hey, are you tired of the media spinning the truth and pushing false narratives upon you? Well, take a look at this. Over the last 2 years, while the mainstream media has been pushing the whole Trump colluding with Russia narrative, the Epoch Times has been covering Spygate, the true story of collusion. And take a look at this. While the mainstream media has essentially given Hillary Clinton a pass, the Epoch Times has continued to report on and investigate for many scandals. And take a look at this. While the establishment media has been politicizing their coverage of the border crisis, the Epoch Times sent their reporters down to the border to actually go on ride-alongs with the sheriffs, speak with the border crossers, and bring the truth to all Americans. And take a look at this. While the mainstream media has been hostile to traditional values, we here at the Epoch Times have given tradition center stage and have given a platform for the wisdom, knowledge, and virtue that have been passed down in our cultures for thousands of years. So if you're looking for an awesome news source, click on that button below and try the Epoch Times for a month for just $1. And not only will you get all this, take a look at this. While the mainstream media has been normalizing both socialism and communism, the Epoch Times has been reporting on the subversion of both America and the world by these two deadly ideologies. And take a look at this. While the establishment media has essentially been neglecting their coverage of China, we've been reporting on the real threat that the Chinese Communist Party poses to both America and our way of life. And take a look at this. Over the last 2.5 years, we've been reporting on the Trump administration honestly and without any false narratives. We give America a true picture of what the Trump administration is up to and why. And take a look at this. At a time when the mainstream media and these giant...
And that consensus then extended beyond our borders. And from the wreckage of World War II, we built a post-war web, architecture, system of alliances and institutions to underwrite freedom and oppose Soviet totalitarianism and to help poor countries develop. And American leadership across the globe wasn't perfect. We made mistakes. At times, we lost sight of our ideals. We had fierce arguments about Vietnam. And we had fierce arguments about Iraq. But thanks to our leadership, a bipartisan leadership, and the efforts of diplomats and Peace Corps volunteers. And most of all, thanks to the constant sacrifices of our men and women in uniform, we not only reduced the prospects of war between the world's great powers, we not only won the Cold War, we helped spread a commitment to certain values and principles, like the rule of law and human rights and democracy, and the notion of the inherent dignity and worth of every individual. And even those countries that didn't abide by those principles were still subject to shame and still had to at least give lip service to the idea. And that provided a lever to continually improve the prospects for people around the world. That's the story of America. A story of progress. Fitful progress, incomplete progress, but progress. And that progress wasn't achieved by just a handful of famous leaders making speeches. It was won because of countless quiet acts of heroism and dedication by citizens, by ordinary people, many of them not much older than you. It was won because rather than be bystanders to history, ordinary people fought and marched and mobilized and built and, yes, voted to make history. Of course, there's always been another darker aspect to America's story. Progress doesn't just move in a straight line. There's a reason why progress hasn't been easy, and why throughout our history, every 2 steps forward seems to sometimes produce 1 step back. Each time we painstakingly pull ourselves closer to our founding ideas, that all of us are created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. The ideals that say every child should have opportunity, and every man and woman in this country who's willing to work hard should be able to find a job and support a family and pursue their small piece of the American dream. Our ideals that say we have a collective responsibility to care for the sick and the infirm. And we have a responsibility to conserve the amazing bounty, the natural resources of this country and of this planet for future generations. Each time we've gotten closer to those ideals, somebody somewhere has pushed back. A fear and anger that's rooted in our past, but it's also born out of the enormous upheavals that have taken place in your brief lifetimes. And by the way, it is brief. When I heard Amari was 11 when I got elected, and now he's started a company. That was yesterday. But think about it. You've come of age in a smaller, more connected world where demographic shifts and the winds of change have scrambled not only traditional economic arrangements, but our social arrangements and our religious commitments and our civic institutions. Most of you don't remember a time before 9/11 when you didn't have to take off your shoes at an airport. Most of you don't remember a time when America wasn't at war, or when money and images and information could travel instantly around the globe, or when the climate wasn't changing faster than our efforts to address it. This change has happened fast, faster than any time in human history. And it created a new economy that has unleashed incredible prosperity. But it's also upended people's lives in profound ways. For those with unique skills or access to technology and capital, a global market has meant unprecedented wealth. For those not so lucky, for the factory worker, or the office worker, or even middle managers, those same forces may have wiped out your job, or at least put you in no position to ask for a raise. And as wages slowed and inequality accelerated, those at the top of the economic pyramid have been able to influence government to skew things even more in their direction. Cutting taxes on the wealthiest Americans, unwinding regulations and weakening worker protections, shrinking the safety net. So you have come of age during a time of growing inequality, a fracturing of economic opportunity. And that growing economic divide compounded other divisions in our country: regional, racial, religious, cultural. It made it harder to build consensus on issues. It made politicians less willing to compromise, which increased gridlock, which made people even more cynical about politics. And then the reckless behavior of financial elites triggered a massive financial crisis 10 years ago this week. A crisis that resulted in the worst recession in any of our lifetimes and caused years of hardship for the American people. For many of your parents, for many of your families. Most of you weren't old enough to fully focus on what was going on at the time. But when I came into office in 2009, we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. 800,000. Millions of people were losing their homes. Many were worried we were entering into a second Great Depression. So we worked hard to end that crisis, but also to break some of these longer-term trends. And the actions we took during that crisis returned the economy to healthy growth and initiated the longest streak of job creation on record. And we covered another 20 million Americans with health insurance, and we cut our deficits by more than half, partly by making sure that people like me, who've been given such amazing opportunities by this country, pay our fair share of taxes to help folks coming up behind me. And by the time I left office, household income was near its all-time high, and the uninsured rate had hit an all-time low, and wages were rising, and poverty rates were falling. I mention all this just so when you hear how great the economy is doing right now, let's just remember when this recovery started. I mean, I'm glad it's continued, but when you hear about this economic miracle that's been going on, when the job numbers come out, monthly job numbers, suddenly Republicans are saying it's a miracle. I had to kind of remind them, actually, those job numbers are the same as they were in 2015, in 2016, and anyway, I digress. So we made